What future life do you dream of? What dreams keep you up at night? And what dreams infiltrate your thoughts during the day and distract you from the things that you should be doing instead? How can these glimpses of our future, how can our trust in God get us through the dark times that we find ourselves in? And like Joseph, be in a place where our reality doesn't seem anything near what God has in store for us. Will you pray with me? God, as we continue to go through the story of Joseph, give us your guidance, give us your wisdom, help us to see ourselves in this story and to trust in you more, to trust in you and your plans for our future completely. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. We're completing chapter 39, beginning in verse 20. And it says, to finish up that story, and Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made him succeed. Just before this moment of being put in prison, there was another moment that Joseph, his entire life up to that point, his whole reality hung on this one decision, this moment's decision to either give in to the temptation that was in front of him or to resist, to run. Well, he had resolved when he went to Egypt, as by way of review, he resolved to live a life of integrity, to live a life in conjunction with the way, the trust and faith and knowledge that he had of the God of his fathers. And so because of this resolve, he resisted the system, to participate in the system of getting ahead, getting for self, of destruction and selfishness that was perpetuated in the society in his time and in ours. And then when he was confronted with evil, with the temptation to sin, he ran out of the house. And even though he resolved, even though he resisted, even though he ran, Joseph still ended up in dark times. He still ended up in prison. Joseph suffered for his integrity. And the distinction that's placed on Joseph here is not that bad things happened to him. They did, but that doesn't make him distinct. That doesn't identify him. It doesn't become a part of his identity. And it's not either that he was blessed by God no matter where he went, although that did happen too. The distinction, the contrast that Joseph is painted against is that he kept his integrity, that he was a man that was upright in his relationship to God. And because of his relationship to God, even though dark times came, even though he suffered, even though he was blessed, he remained upright. So chapter 40 of Genesis, it says this. So sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against the Lord, the king of Egypt. And so Pharaoh put them into prison. Now the cupbearer and the baker, these were not just occupations, like the person that held a cup or the one that made bread, although they did that. These were positions of authority, of relationship to the king. The cupbearer was the one that held the cup for Pharaoh, his wine glass, and whatever he drank, he would sip a little bit of it, and he'd be the taste tester and make sure no one was trying to poison the king. And if anything happened to him, then obviously the king shouldn't drink it. But he was also the one that was always by Pharaoh's side. And so when Pharaoh was dealing with matters of court and nation, then the cupbearer was there to be a sounding board, to lend advice, to give direction, to share what he has heard around the palace through other channels that the king might not be aware of. So it was a very trusted position. It was very important. It was very privileged. The baker was not too much different. He was in charge of all of the food. It wasn't just making the food. It was also preparing it. It was arranging it. It was kind of like an event planner. It was the one that was a part of every social gathering, a part of the king's daily life. And this was also somebody preparing food for the king. So this was also a trusted person. So these two people, they committed an offense. And so Pharaoh puts them into prison, there where Joseph is at. And Joseph is given charge, is given the responsibility to care for these prisoners as well as all the others. And I can see that Joseph could have been in a position where he also came from Potiphar's house, who was an important man in the king's connection, and here are these other servants, and they're put in there. Maybe he might think, you know what? I don't deserve to be in here. These guys probably do. I don't want to associate with them. I don't want to talk to them. In fact, I'm having a pretty crummy time right now. And he could be sulking. He could be angry. He could be embittered at the whole situation. But instead, even though he is in a bad situation that he does not deserve, even though he is wrongfully accused and he is suffering under the punishment that he shouldn't be under, he still reaches out to the people that are around him. He takes care of the cupbearer and the baker, and he builds a relationship with them. And this is all inferred right here in that verse 5. And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker. They both dream dreams, and that's not very uncommon for people to dream dreams. But they dreamed dreams that were very similar and on the same night. And they recognized the similarities and they recognized the significance. And these dreams seemed very important to them in the dream as well as when they woke up. And so Joseph, he comes in and he notices that their attitude is different. They're unusually unhappy. And he approaches them and he says, everything okay, guys? And they say, well, we both had dreams in the same night, and this seems really significant, but we don't have someone to interpret it. And Joseph says this in verse 8, end of verse 8. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. Now, how would Joseph have known that they were acting different if he didn't know them? I had been talking with them over a long period of time. He got to know these guys, and so he knew who they were and what they were about. And so when they had these dreams, and they trusted him. And so the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said, in my dream there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches, and as soon as it budded, it also blossomed, and then the clusters ripened into grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation. 3 branches are the 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into this pit. When he hears that they have dreams that they need interpreted, Joseph's identity is so wrapped up in his relationship with God that as soon as he hears that they have a problem that only God can solve, he says, tell me. Now this is amazing because this is Joseph who has been wrongfully accused, wrongfully imprisoned, and now is in this prison right next to these guys. And yet he knows instantaneously, his knee-jerk reaction is, oh, well then tell me. God hears me when I talk. God is with me. I'm his servant. And his identity in his relationship with God, the fact that over the years of servitude in Potiphar's house, he remained true to the God of his fathers, that he remained in relationship with God. It was a matter-of-fact detail. He doesn't even miss a beat. Oh, tell me then. And then God will give you the vision, give you the interpretation. And so he says, oh, this is the interpretation. And he gives these details out to the cupbearer. And then verse 16. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, oh, okay, that was a good interpretation. I like that. And he says, well, I also had a dream. And he's like, yeah, well, I had a dream like that one, so I hope I have a good interpretation like that one. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked foods for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. And on the 3rd day, when Pharaoh's birthday, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all of his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Here we have Joseph. And you can imagine the first week went by and he thought, okay, well, any day now. 2nd week. Well, he must be talking to the king, and the king's doing what he's needing to do, and I don't know, 3rd week. I wonder what 4th week, 2nd month, 3rd month. At some point, Joseph thought, this guy is not going to do what he said he was going to do. He's not going to talk to Pharaoh, I guess I can imagine that Joseph could have been given into despair, that he just was not going to get out of that place. But because he had given, in this story, notice how because he had given this interpretation, because he cared about the cupbearer and the baker, and to be able to share the interpretation to them, he saw that interpretation be fulfilled in 3 days. And because God had answered and given that interpretation, it was correct. He had that extra, in that dark time of unknowing, he had that extra assurance, that extra encouragement that his own dream, that the reality of that was given to him in that dream when he was 17, of that would someday be his reality, and that God would continue to remain faithful to him, even though he was in that dark time. That's a wonderful lesson to learn from this point in Joseph's story. And another point that is just a sad observation, that the cupbearer was most likely not part of the ruling class. He was not in the same ethnicity actually as the pharaoh was, and the other royals in that court system, in that they think about the 12th dynasty of Egypt. And for Joseph, who was also not from that party, to be connecting with somebody else of another minority group and saying, hey, like, you were oppressed wrongfully, I'm oppressed wrongfully, we're both not of a ruling, like, can you help me out? And when you get into that position, and then to be forgotten, to be ignored, it's just a sad point. Because then in chapter 41, right at the beginning, it says, after 2 whole years, I love how the Bible writer said, whole years, Pharaoh dreamed, and he was standing beside the Nile. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke, and he fell asleep. He woke, and then he fell back asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing out of one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh woke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirits were troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all of its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. And verse 9, then the cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. And he said, when I was in prison and you had been angry, and you know what happened there was a man there that gave me, I had a dream, and he gave me the interpretation. And he can do this. He can give this interpretation. And so it says in verse 14, then Pharaoh, listen what Pharaoh does. He sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. Whoa! That Pharaoh, he sent and he called. Those are beautiful things for people to do. To send for someone and to call them. We need to do that for each other. So to send and to call Joseph, and they quickly, for so long in this place of despair and not knowing, and then to be quickly brought out of the pit. Now the pit in this context is referring to the prison, and that was just a way to refer to the dungeon, to the jail cell. But for Joseph's story, that word is pretty significant, to bring him out of the pit, because his brothers before had thrown him into a pit, a dry well, and then pulled him out to send him into slavery to be sold to the Egyptians. A very sad reality for Joseph. And now he is being quickly brought out of the pit. Amen. It's good. It's good stuff. Good stuff here. And so Pharaoh, Joseph shaved, he got clean, he pretty raggedy. And then he comes, Pharaoh says, I heard that you can interpret dreams. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, verse 16, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. God will give you words of peace. I think that is pretty significant, that Joseph knew that if God was doing all of this, God was doing something for the benefit of Pharaoh. And in that court system, you don't, in that context, you don't give Pharaoh bad words. You don't give the king bad news. And Joseph, he knew that what he was going to be given, even before he heard the dream, would be good news. And because that's what God sends. But then listen to what happens. Pharaoh then says, well, I saw these great fat cows, the healthy cows coming up out of the Nile, and then 7 scrawny cows, like nothing but bones, emaciated cows coming up out of them, 7 of them. And the 7 emaciated, ugly cows, I mean, unprecedented ugliness, like the ugliest things I've ever seen is essentially what he's saying here. And he says, and they came up and they swallowed up the healthy cows, and it didn't even look like they had eaten anything at all. And then I saw that there was a stalk with 7 heads of grain on it, and they were the plump heads of grain, really good for food. And then 7 blighted heads sprung up out of the stalk, and then gobbled up the seven heads of grain. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, verse 25, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. And he said that the 7 cows and the 7 ears of wheat or corn or grain, whatever, that the good-looking ones, those are 7 years of plenty and abundance. But that the 7 cows that are emaciated and sickly, and the 7 heads of wheat that are blighted, these are 7 bad years of famine that will follow. And he says, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do, that there will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them there will arrive 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow. For it will be very severe, and the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that this thing is fixed by God, and that God will shortly bring it to pass. That he said it is certain and it is urgent. Where is this good news? Where is this peace? These good words to Pharaoh that that Joseph's supposed to be giving? Joseph, he says, now let Pharaoh pick somebody who's wise and discerning, pick somebody that can figure this stuff out and can be set over the land to set aside 1/5, 20% of the increase, make it a tax on the people, so that everyone, all of the grain that's grown during the 7 good years, that 20% of it is set aside for the 7 bad years that will be following. And so that way there will be food. And he says that the land may not perish through the famine. 1/5, everyone contributes so that everyone survives. Everyone participates in the salvation of everybody else. That principle, he says, do this. And then Pharaoh, he speaks to the servants and says, well, is there anyone better than Joseph in whom the Spirit of God rests? Like, how is there anyone that's going to be wiser than this? And so he says, since God has shown you all this, and there's no one as discerning and wise as you are, you will be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and a gold chain around his neck. And he made him ride in the 2nd chariot that he owned, and they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Now Pharaoh, he promotes him, and he gives him a new garment. He gives him a garment of fine linen. Joseph again has this coat that is put over him. Now this is by the king of Egypt. Joseph and his coats, huh? And so then Pharaoh, he gives him a new name, a title, a position. He gives him a wife from the priest's daughter. So a passes daughter, kind of, sort of, stretch there. And he gives Joseph Oh, and Joseph, as he implements all of these things, he gathers so much grain that they stop counting it. They just can't even fathom how much, and they say it's like the sand of the sea. They stopped measuring it because they couldn't be measured. That's how successful his campaign was. And there, the year before the famine came, Joseph and his wife have 2 sons, and unlike the mothers in his family line, the father, names the children. And so he names them, and he says the first one is called Manasseh, because God has made me forget all the hardships and all the pain that was in my father's house, and he's made me forget. And so Manasseh means to forget. And then the second name he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, and Ephraim means fruitful. And so he names these sons these two words because of his own experience. And then the chapter concludes with, and so the famine spread over all the land, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Joseph, look at the turnaround. Joseph sold to the Egyptians. At the beginning of his story entering Egypt, he was sold. Joseph was sold to the Egyptians. And now Joseph sells to the Egyptians for their salvation. It's a beautiful turnaround, and God is moving this whole way along. Now, looking at this story, I want you to consider the dark times that we go through. That in this life, there are dark times that come our way. There are famines of all kinds, and I'm not just talking about food. There is a great need to store up for ourselves treasures in heaven, to store up for ourselves relationship and trust in God, our Father. And this cannot be done by hoarding it. Spiritual storing up does not happen all at once. You cannot procrastinate and then get it done in a couple of days in a spiritual shopping spree through Scripture. It is something that is built up, a fraction here, a bit there, every day, every week, every Sabbath, every experience that comes our way. We learn to trust God in that aspect of our lives, and to give that feeling or that bit of selfishness up and over to God. When we come up in connection with the wrongs that are being done to other people, we then we strengthen that bit of ourselves, and we experience giving when we feel like we can only live in reserve. And this extra that we store up in our experiences then become this storehouse of blessing, this storehouse of mercy, grace, compassion, justice that we can give to the people that are around us. That we can live, there are different ways to live, and we can live in a way that we're always living right up to the top of our means, that we're always eking out each day, just barely, we're crashing into bed and mumbling out a quick prayer before we fall to sleep, and getting up and dashing out the door. But to say, no, these are years of abundance. Even during this time of quarantine, even during this time of confusion, these are times of abundance. To say, I'm going to take this time, I'm going to take that fraction of my day, and I'm going to give it to God, and I'm going to spend this time in storing up relationship and trust in Him. That there are, unlike the story of Joseph, we don't know when these hard times will happen. And we don't know what will happen. And think about, how have you been existing through this time of quarantine. This might be a glimpse in your struggle. This might be a glimpse into the needs, the deficiencies, the emptiness that is in your storehouse, that you don't trust in God in every aspect of your life. Is it financial? Is it emotional? Is it social? What areas are you not trusting God completely in? And these glimpses may be the only glimpses that you get before an end. And so to say, God, search me, know my heart, see if there's any empty, evil way in me, and create in me a clean heart, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. To go through Scripture, story by story, piece by piece, and learn these stories, and to learn to trust like these people. We read these stories so that these stories can read us, and to tell us where we're lacking and where we need to grow and where we need to depend more fully on our Father in heaven, who sees us, who hears us, even in the dark times, and that cares and has a plan for our future. Ask God, where is my faith? How have I been preparing? Have I only been living my life caring for my own needs, and ignoring the injustice and needs of the people around me? To resolve in my life to live this daily preparation, this weekly necessity of spending time with God. Not all at once, right up before something that hits or after it hits, but to spiritually, to not live in this anticipation of, to live in a life of anticipation, of preparation, daily preparation, to be in relationship with God. This integrity that will carry us through, and not putting off the day of preparation for our souls. This story of Joseph is an encouragement to us that he went through terribly dark times, and God brought him out of the pit. Now, who is the person to take this storehouse initiative, to be commissioned with this responsibility, this huge work of righting the wrongs that are around us, that are in our world, and that will stir up in ourselves store up in ourselves this preparation for our future hard times? In who does the Spirit of God dwell? He dwells in you. He has poured out his Spirit on you. And so you are the one to enact this need and to create this space for others. And it's a big work. It's huge. And it can be scary, but God has given it to us, and we can do this day by day, week by week, Sabbath by Sabbath. And I'd like to pray for you and for me during this new initiative. Will you pray with me? Father, you are the one that works in us to will and to do your good pleasure. You're the one that is the beginning and the end, and you know the end from the beginning. God, I want to live with you. We want to live in trust, in trusting your guidance, because we know who you are and we know who we are, your servants, your daughters, your sons. So God, I'm asking that as we are storing up piece by piece, may this storehouse be filled and overflowing so that other people may live. May we right the wrongs that are around us because we care. And may we do this in times of plenty and in times of scarcity. Thank you for the provisions that you've given us through your Son, Jesus. And thank you for the work that you put in our hands to accomplish. We ask and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.